Varna is a Sanskrit word which means type, or order, color, or class. The term refers to social classes in Brahminical books like the Manusmriti.These and other Hindu literature classified the society in principle into four varnas: the Brahmins, priests, scholars and teachers; the Kshatriyas, rulers, warriors and administrators; the Vaishyas, cattle herders, agriculturists, artisans and merchants; the Shudras, laborers and service providers. This quadruple division is a form of social stratification not to be confused with the much more nuanced jati of the European term caste. The Varna system is discussed in Hindu texts, and understood as idealized human callings. The concept is generally traced to the Purusha Sukta verse of the Rig Veda. However, modern scholarship believes that this verse was inserted at a later date, possibly to create a charter myth. The commentary on the Varna system in the Manusmriti is oft cited. Counter to these textual classifications, many Hindu texts and doctrines question and disagree with the Varna system of social classification. Etymology and origins. Varna is a Sanskrit term varna. It is derived from the root var, meaning to cover, to envelop, count, classify, consider, describe or choose. The word appears in the Rig Veda, where it means color, outward appearance, exterior, form, figure or shape. The word means color, tint, dye, pigment in the Mahabharata. Varna contextually means color, race, tribe, species, kind, sort, nature, character, quality, property of an object or people in some Vedic and medieval texts. Varna refers to four social classes in the Manusmriti. The Vedas. The earliest application to the formal division into four social classes appears in the late Rig Vedic Purusha Sukta, which has the Brahmin, Rajanya, Vaishya and Shudra classes emerging from the mouth, arms, thighs and feet at the sacrifice of the primordial Purusha, respectively. This Purusha Sukta Varna verse is now generally considered to have been inserted at the later date into the Vedic text, possibly as a charter myth. Stephanie Jameson and Joel Brereton, a professor of Sanskrit and religious studies, state, "There is no evidence in the Rig Veda for an elaborate, much subdivided and overarching caste system, and the Varna system seems to be embryonic in the Rig Veda and, both then and later, a social ideal rather than a social reality." Ram Sharan Sharma states that the Rig Vedic society was neither organized on the basis of social division of labor nor on that of differences in wealth, was primarily organized on the basis of kin, tribe and lineage. In the post-Vedic period, the Varna division is described in the Dharma Shastra literature, the Mahabharata and in the Puranas. The Dharmasastras. Varna system is extensively discussed in Dharmasastras. Varna system in Dharmasastras divide the society into four varnas. Those who fall out of this system because of the grievous sins are ostracized as outcasts and considered outside the Varna system. Barbarians and those who are unrighteous, unethical are also considered patita in Dharma texts. Recent scholarship suggests that the discussion of Varna, as well as untouchable outcasts, in these texts does not resemble the modern-era caste system in India. Patrick Olivelle, a professor of Sanskrit and Indian religions and credited with modern translations of Vedic literature, Dharma Sutras and Dharma Sastras, states that ancient and medieval Indian texts do not support the ritual pollution, purity impurity as the basis for Varna system. According to Olivelle, purity impurity is discussed in the Dharma Sastra texts, but only in the context of the individual's moral, ritual and biological pollution. In his review of Dharma Sastras, Olivelle writes, "We see no instance when a term of pure impure is used with reference to a group of individuals or a varna or caste. The only mention of impurity in the Shastra texts from the first millennium is about about people who commit grievous sins and thereby fall out of their Varna. These, writes Olivelle, are called fallen people and impure, declaring that they be ostracized. Olivelle adds that the overwhelming focus in matters relating to impurity in the Dharma Sastra texts concerns individuals irrespective of the Varna affiliation, and all four Varnas could attain purity or impurity by the content of the character, ethical intent, actions, innocence or ignorance, stipulations, and ritualistic behaviors. Olivelle states, Dumont is correct in his assessment that the ideology of Varna is not based on purity. If it were, we should expect to find at least some comment on the relative purity and impurity of the different Varnas. What is even more important is that the ideology of purity and impurity that emerges from the Dharma literature is concerned with the individual and not with groups, with purification and not with purity, and lends little support to a theory which makes relative purity the foundation of social stratification. The first three Varnas are described in the Dharma Sastras as twice born, and they are allowed to study the Vedas. Such a restriction of who can study Vedas is not found in the Vedic-era literature. Manusmriti assigns cattle rearing as Vaishya occupation, but historical evidence shows that Brahmins, Kshatriyas and Shudras also owned and reared cattle, and that cattle wealth was mainstay of the households. Ramnarayan Rawat, a professor of history and specializing in social exclusion in the Indian subcontinent, states that 19th-century British records show that Shamars, listed as untouchables, also owned land and cattle and were active agriculturalists. The emperors of Kosala and the Prince of Kasi are other examples. Tim Ingold, an anthropologist, writes that the Manusmriti is a highly schematic commentary on the Varna system, but it too provides models rather than descriptions. Susan Bailey states that Manusmriti and other scriptures helped elevate Brahman in the social hierarchy, and these were a factor in the making of the Varna system. But the ancient texts did not in some way create the phenomenon of caste in India. The epics, the Mahabharata, estimated to have been completed by about the 4th century CE, discusses the Varna system in section 12.181. The epic offers two models on Varna. The first model describes Varna as color-based system through a character named Bhrigu. Brahman's Varna was white, Kshatriyas was red, Vaishyas was yellow, and the Shudras black. This description is questioned by Bharadvaja, who says that colors are seen among all the Varnas, that desire, anger, fear, greed, grief, anxiety, hunger and toil prevails over all human beings, that bile and blood flow from all human bodies. So what distinguishes the Varnas, he asks. The Mahabharata then declares, according to Alf Hilterbeetel, a professor of religion, there is no distinction of Varnas. This whole universe is Brahmin. It was created formally by Brahma, came to be classified by acts. The Mahabharata thereafter recites a behavioral model for Varna, that those who were inclined to anger, pleasures and boldness attained the Kshatriya Varna, those who were inclined to cattle rearing and living off the plough attained the Vaishyas, those who were fond of violence, covetousness and impurity attained the Shudras. The Brahmin class is modeled in the epic as the archetype default state of man dedicated to truth, austerity and pure conduct. In the Mahabharata and pre-medieval era Hindu texts, according to Hilterbeetel, it is important to recognize, in theory, Varna as non-genealogical. The four Varnas are not lineages, but categories. Varna in Buddhist texts. Ancient Buddhist texts mention Varna system in South Asia, but the details suggest that it was a non-rigid, flexible and with characteristics devoid of features of a social stratification system. Maurice Walsh, a German scholar and translator of Daya Nikaya, provides a discussion between Gautama Buddha and a Hindu Brahmin named Sonadana who was very learned in the Vedas. Gautama Buddha asks in Daya Nikaya, according to the Theravada Pali text translation by Walsh, by how many qualities do Brahmins recognize another Brahmin? How would one declare truthfully and without falling into falsehood, "I am a Brahmin"? Sonadana initially lists 5 qualities, as he is of pure descent on both the mother's and the father's side. He is well versed in mantras. He is of fair color, handsome and pleasing. He is virtuous, learned and wise, and he is the first as second to hold the sacrificial ladle. Buddha then asks the Brahmin, if we omit one of these qualities you just listed, could not one be still a true Brahmin? Sonadana, one by one, eliminates fair color and looks, then eliminates Varna in which one was born, and then eliminates the ability to recite mantra and sacrifices as a requirement of being a Brahmin. Sonadana asserts that just 2 qualities are necessary to truthfully and without falling into falsehood identify a Brahmin. These 2 qualities are being virtuous and being learned and wise. Sonadana adds, states Walsh, that it is impossible to reduce the requirement for being a Brahmin any further, because, for wisdom is purified by morality, and morality is purified by wisdom. Where one is, the other is. The moral man has wisdom and the wise man has morality, and the combination of morality and wisdom is called the highest thing in the world. Brian Black and Dean Patin states Sonadana admits after this, we only know this much Gautama. It would be well if Reverend Gautama would explain meaning of the 2. Peter Macefield, a Buddhism scholar and ancient Pali text translator, states that during the Nikaya text period of Buddhism, Varna as a class system is attested, but the described Varna was not a caste system. The Pali texts enumerate the 4 varnas: Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaisya and Sudra. Macefield notes that people in any varna could in principle perform any profession. The early Buddhist texts, for instance, identify some Brahmins to be farmers and in other professions. The texts state that anyone of any birth could perform the priestly function and that the Brahmin took food from anyone, suggesting that strictures of commensality were as yet unknown. The Nikaya texts also imply that endogamy was not mandated in ancient India. Macefield concludes, if any form of caste system was known during the Nikaya period, and it is doubtful that it was, this was in all probability restricted to certain non-Aryan groups. Varna in Jaina texts, Adi Purana, an 8th century text of Jainism by Jinasena, is the earliest mention of Varna and Jati in Jainism literature. Jinasena does not trace the origin of Varna system to Rigveda or to Purusha Sukta, instead traces Varna to the Bharata legend. According to this legend, Bharata performed an ahimsa, and those members of his community who refused to harm or hurt any living being were called as the priestly Varna in ancient India, and Bharata called them Dvij at twice born. Jinasena states that those who are committed to ahimsa are Deva Brahmanas, divine Brahmins. The text Adi Purana also discusses the relationship between Varna and Jati. According to Padmanabh Jaini, a professor of Indic studies, Jainism and Buddhism, the Adi Purana text states there is only one Jati called Manasya Jati of the human caste, but divisions arise account of their different professions. The Varna of Kshatriya arose when Rishabha procured weapons to serve the society and assumed the powers of a king, while Vaishya and Shudra Varna arose from different means of livelihood in which they specialized. Varna in Sikh texts. Sikhism is a 15th-century religion that originated in the Punjab region in the medieval India. Sikh text mention Varna as Varn and Jati as Satisat Biradari. Eleanor Nesbitt, a professor of religion and specializing in Christian, Hindu and Sikh studies, states that the Varna is described as a class system in 18th to 20th century Sikh literature, while Zat developed into a caste system particularly during the British colonial era. In theory, Nesbitt quotes the Sikh dictum to be a Sikh should be a Brahmin in piety, a Kshatriya in defensive truth and the oppressed, a Vaishya in business acumen and hard work, and a Shudra in serving humanity. A Sikh should be all castes in one person, who should be above caste. Tantra, the tantric movement that developed as a tradition distinct from orthodox Hinduism between the 8th and 11th centuries CE, also relaxed many societal strictures regarding class and community distinction. However, it would be an overgeneralization to say that the tantrics did away with all social restrictions, as N.N. Bhattacharya explains. For example, Tantra according to its very nature has nothing to do with the system, but in the later Tantras elements are pronounced. This is because, although many of our known Tantric teachers were non-Brahmanas, rather belonging to the lower ranks of society, almost all of the known authors of the Tantric treatises were Brahmanas. Varna and Jati. The terms Varna and Jati are two distinct concepts. Jati refers to the thousands of endogamous groups prevalent across the subcontinent. A Jati may be divided into exogamous groups based on the same gotras. The classical authors scarcely speak of anything other than the Varnas. Even Indologists sometimes confuse the two.